Huh.
On the shore I stand alone. Ocean's whisper calls my name. Depth and longing in my soul, seeking more than just this game. Waves crash softly at my feet, echoes in my heart so deep. Eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Crash softly at my feet, echoes in my heart so deep. Eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shells and sand beneath my toes, tides reveal what ebb and flows. In the quiet still I hear whisper longings crystal clear. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Ocean near our soul's desire, burning with the holy fire. Depth of love beyond all dreams, in the vastness it redeems. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore.
Alrighty, everybody. Hey, hello. Welcome to When Deep Calls Deep. It's been kind of a little bit crazy. And the last 2 weeks, like the last 6 episodes that were supposed to run, got pushed back or canceled or whatever, just because life is crazy for everybody. So I am really excited about this for a lot of reasons. One, because we're actually getting to do it. And because first time on When Deep Calls Deep, I am very excited. Long time coming. Johnathan Pritchett is finally coming on my channel, and I am so, so happy that you're here. And we are going to be talking about one of your favorite topics of honor and shame culture and how that works in the ancient Near East and in the Bible. And so, but first of all, for anyone that is watching that doesn't happen to know who you are, Johnathan Pritchett, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me on your channel. You've been on my channel plenty, and you finally got around to inviting me. So, long time coming for the invite more than me showing up. We'll just put I'm a vice president of academic affairs and a professor at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary. And I am a co-host on Trinity Radio, where we host the Biblical Rose Gallery, which Amber is one of the panel members, regular most of the time. And we have a bunch of apologetics videos, and we do a weekly or sometimes weekly, sometimes bi-weekly live stream there. And I also have my own personal channel called Theology Geek Fitness, which nobody ever pays any attention to. So that's what I'm doing. But I'm glad to be here.
Well, this is because yeah, this is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this because I think there's a lot that this is one of those things that I still have a lot to learn. So I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation because I have a lot of gaps and I haven't had a chance to just do as much deep study into this, sadly, as I should have at the past. But you can't get to everything at once. So we, take them when we can get them. So um, but yeah, we're going to jump into honor shame culture. And I want to kind of start with like, let's, this first, Pritchett, how would you like just define the basic concept of honor shame culture? Let's just start with what does that mean when we say that reference to honor shame culture?
Well, I like what Seneca said about it and on benefits. And if you don't mind me reading a quote, I'll read what he said. Now, he's writing in the first century, but this comes from a long tradition, predates Homer, and it's, of course, cross-cultural idea. But Seneca writes, the one firm conviction from which we move to the other proof of other points is this: that which is honorable is held dear for no other reason than because it is honorable. So honor would be the highest virtue, as we would say, in the ancient world. And this is cross-cultural. And just to note that it is also probably one of the highest virtues in most of the modern world outside of the West. To illustrate the difference, Western cultures are what we call guilt cultures. Westerns are more individualistic as opposed to collectivist. They are more introspective as opposed to outward orientation of self. We're more inward orientation of self. We always talk about, I want to be my authentic self. I'm going to be me, or I'm going to do me, or my thing. We hear people talk like that all the time. Well, that's not something that in most of the modern world, outside of the Western nations and most of the ancient world ever thought. They understood their self-identity or self-worth is how honorable of a participant of their tribe, their clan, their community, their nation, their family, whatever. How honorable are they? And that's how their self-understanding is by their honor rating, and how they are esteemed by others shapes their sense of identity and self-worth. And most of the world's actually like that. And so what's interesting is when you talk about the scripture to people outside of the West, they pick up on a lot of the nuances that we don't. We have to learn these things. And I know that, sociological factors like this, studying cultural anthropology of the ancient world, much less the modern world, is not popular among a lot of Western Christians. We associate those kinds of disciplines with, modern academia and talking about contemporary cultures, and we want to vomit. And I get that, because a lot of sociology in today is rubbish, but it's very important work to do that, because it shades in the historical task that all Christians have to do if they want to properly understand the Bible in its original context. So while I get the modern sentiments against cultural anthropology and sociology and stuff like that for understanding the modern world, and most of that's just, academic garbage in a bunch of secular universities, applying that to the ancient world as in addition to doing the history, because history can only give you trivia and data, dates and names and events and all of that we have insofar as we could determine. But sociological understanding of the ancient world and these cultural things help us understand that history and how the people who lived that history experienced it, and the categories in which they thought. And so honor and shame, kind of the corollary to honor, that would be perceived as like most important for everyone in terms of their sense of identity, in terms of what is the most proper action, how we have wisdom literature in the scriptures, how wisdom is shaped around what the in-group would perceive as honorable behavior. So honor is kind of an umbrella virtue. Now, depending on what nation you belong to, or what tribe, or what family, or what religion, all of that, you may see things that are honorable that other people will see as shameful, and vice versa. So how you understand certain actions and certain ideas and thoughts as honorable or not is going to differ among different in groups, but the idea of honor itself is universal for the ancient world.
Okay, so that brings like two questions to mind. So, first question in this idea of the not West idea of more of a inward, independent kind of concept, that this idea of interconnectedness, and for those of us who are right-brained, visual, image-based people, so would this be something that you would see like redwood trees, that instead of growing their roots deep down individually in each tree, they create their, well, bulk of their roots create this interconnected, interwoven network. So they all kind of, they're individual trees, but they stand and fall together at the same time. So they're the same, but individual, like
Well,
interdependent in
they
that
would
way.
ancient and a lot of like Japan for or certain Asian countries, China, they would see that interconnected rootness more than us. We would see ourselves more as a tree without a forest. We're each our own tree, right? So it's it's not like so distant and foreign of a concept that we can't grasp it, because all of these things run on a spectrum.
Right.
But it is different enough to where you are no more aware of cultural differences as being a fish out of water in another country. So, I was talking to a friend of mine. You may know him from Facebook or whatever. His name is Second Yang.
Mm.
And of course, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. He
Yeah,
posts a lot of
I know who
videos.
he is.
Lately,
Yeah.
a lot of videos of himself lifting weights, but he used to always talk in theology, and now he's become so westernized he's obsessed with himself, I guess. But I'm teasing, Second. But he'll tell you things like, growing up, it's different because, like, if I'm on an elementary school playground and I hit another kid, right? And I see that I draw blood. Well, I might feel guilty that I hurt him that way. And then I'm going to feel a little bit of shame and embarrassment when I get in trouble. I go to the principal's office. My parents discipline me at home. Whereas if you're like a young Asian boy and you punch somebody, what's prominent is the fact that you're going to get in trouble and you're going to embarrass yourself. You're going to embarrass your family, and you're going to bring shame upon yourself and ill repute and shame upon your family and all of that. And then distant from that is you're going to feel a little bit bad. So it's not like you don't feel bad at all, as opposed to me. But what's more prominent is how bad I feel on the inside versus how bad I just humiliated myself and my family and my community and everything else by behaving in a way that's incongruent to our values. So for them, it's the shame that's primary. And it's the same way in the ancient world, as opposed to the feelings of guilt. Right. So that, right. And like I said, it's a spectrum. It's not like they never felt bad about anything. But it is trying to orient our minds to how they understood what was honorable and what was shameful, because it can cause confusion when you read some of the Psalms and you think David just felt so horrible about himself. No, he felt more shame and humiliation over his affair with Bathsheba than he did, oh, I feel so guilty because I did this to Uriah and I did this to, it's more about the shame that he brought upon himself, his name, his kingdom, his God, all of that. Only you have I offended is what he says, about, well, no, that's not technically true, but that's him expressing how shameful he feels as opposed to how bad he feels, right? And it's not bad at all, but it's to orient people to what mattered to them more than what matters to like modern individualist Westerners. So
this would play into like Carmen Imes's work on what it means to bear God's name well. It's not about so much swearing, but about presenting a representation of Yahweh that was embarrassing to him, or to, like, we see Moses interceding, don't wipe out the Israelites because it's going to be bad PR for you if you bring them
Right.
out of Egypt and destroy them. Like, that's not going to make you look good, kind of an idea.
Yeah, it's more about your name and your reputation and your honor rating among other nations and peoples that would see you do this to the Hebrews, as opposed to, it's so bad and mean if you just wipe them all out, God. Okay, that's not going to do anything, right? That's not what they were operating on. Is, oh, but wouldn't that be just so bad? No, this is a God that flooded the world. Let's just be honest about that, you know. Um, so appealing to like emotions, and would you feel bad if you didn't? No, he's not. He's a just and holy God, and so appealing to his name and reputation is going to resonate more with the readers of that story, and probably the way Yahweh thinks. I mean, Yahweh's not obligated to orient himself around modern contemporary Western individualists, you know, and our concern for feelings. So he, you know, that's how he appealed to God, and it was a winning strategy because he didn't wipe them all out after the golden calf incident, you know, because it was about his name and his reputation, right, as opposed to, well, wouldn't that just be mean? Right. That's not
right.
Wouldn't you feel bad? No.
Yeah. I mean, you replace Yahweh with a lesser God. How, like, that's just humiliating to his reputation to the nations around, which really struck me when I actually read through Joshua, looking more at spiritual warfare and this idea of Yahweh coming in and challenging the gods of the other nations around. And that really stuck out to me, how Joshua and Judges and so much of the Old Testament, every nation around Israel understood Yahweh better than Israel did, I think.
Well, of course they did, because what was God's point in the Exodus? You know, I'm going to let Pharaoh stand so that my name can be proclaimed throughout the earth, right? So his name and reputation, he allowed Pharaoh, and even strengthens Pharaoh's resolve, with one of the hardened words that we translate 3 different words as hardened, but the right point that Yahweh was trying to accomplish with that was so that he could display his power and make his name known. So by the time you get to Joshua and the conquest, I mean, this is not something that you're just like, oh, well, I don't even know who they represent. No, it would resonate that they are doing this in the name of Yahweh. And I know Richard Dawkins and atheists from my apologetics, you know, interactions in that community, they like those type of new atheists, like, oh, well, Yahweh was a tribal war god. It's like, yeah, and that mattered in the ancient world. Strike fear into people. I mean, it's, the world doesn't have to comport to our feelings for all times and all places. And when you think about like honor, and why that was so important, I don't think that guilt cultures have improved upon that or made that any better, because if you actually cared at all what other people thought about you, and if we brought back honor and its corollary shame, our contemporary Western culture might be in better shape, because I don't know about, you know, the Pacific Northwest part of the world where you're from, but you've been to Evansville, so you could imagine all of the memes you've ever seen about Walmart are true of Evansville Walmart. And so when you walk in there, you do see people dressed as if they have no shame. And it would be nice if people had a little bit of that sense of shame, because shame has 2 parts to it. If we esteemed honor, we would do what was honorable in view of society. Sadly, we don't see much of anything as honorable anymore. But shame is not just a negative, you know, flip side of that, where people feel shame and the humiliation of any sort of wrong actions that offends the in group and hurts their honor rating. But shame also has a positive reinforcement that the fear of it is enough to motivate behaviors into the right direction. So so the threat that you will be shamed and humiliated, and not just you, but the fact that you care enough about your people that you don't want to bring this shame that you might cause on your parents or grandparents or cousins and aunts and uncles and your whole family and your whole church and your whole community, whatever. That sense that you don't want to be the member of the community that brings down everyone, because you're not an island to yourself and you're going to wreak havoc, and everyone's going to esteem all the people connected to you less than they did, because it doesn't just affect you. Your behavior affects your entire, in group. That it's a motivator. Avoiding shame is a motivator for proper behavior in accordance to what values the in group sees as honorable.
Right. So I want to kind of dig into a little bit about how does the concept of honor and shame as it plays out in the Bible and in the Old Testament in the context of the Hebrews and Yahweh. How is that contrasted? Like, how does honor and shame change in regards to the way that it's used, or the way that it's understood, and different from the cultures around? Because that's one of the things God does, especially in the Exodus, but we see it from the whole story of Torah, is God's separating himself from the rest of the cultures and nations around, and this progression ending in the crescendo of the Exodus and setting them even further apart. But how does that contrast from, to give us some cultural context there, Pritchett?
Well, again, like I said, first of all cultures esteem to honor. It's
Mhm.
what was made them distinct. And when you read the Levitical laws, for example, I mean, when you look at, okay, so you bring in some sort of what we term as pollution, okay, so you become defiled in some manner with an illness or whatever else, and there's a remedy for that, and there's a ritual for that, okay, and to follow through with all of those kinds of what seemed to us maybe gratuitous, go to the outside of the city, wait for 7 days, come back, report to the priest, be inspected. If such as happens, shave your head, do all this other stuff, right? It seems like a lot, but these distinctions that they have for these rituals even are what set them apart. And to be a covenantal member of Israel means you're not going to eat shellfish. You're not going to wear certain types of fabrics that have been crossed. All of these types of things, because what they do is they define a people. And it gives the status of these behaviors are honorable, these are shameful, and these are the punishments that accompany that behavior. And they distinctly set apart the Israelites from the surrounding peoples. Now, you can go read a bunch of ancient law codes and things like that, Hammurabi and whatever. You can that's a popular one, but there's a bunch. And you can go read some parallel literature. And yeah, there is some overlap and similarities to them, but those aren't as interesting as what sets them apart as different, and sometimes into the details of the dietary laws and so forth. Circumcision being a very prominent one. I mean, no one else engaged in that. But it's honorables on the 8th day to have your son circumcised, because that's what you did, and that's the honorable behavior. That's how you are a participant of the community. Now, in certain, not all, and thankfully this is getting better, a lot of people understood that stuff through the lens of legalism, right? That, oh, thank God we don't have to do all of these rituals and all of these, obey all of these law codes or whatever. But to them, it was something to delight in, because this gave them a sense of what is the behavior expected of me to be a valued member of the in group, and how are we going to be distinct from all of the other out groups in these nations. And I mean, you can go to Amos and hear Amos, before he rips the northern and southern kingdom, he rips all the other. And you can just imagine any Israelite listening to his prophecy is going to cheer for the first chapter and a half. And then he's going to go like, oh, wait, oh no. When it turns back, because when he starts going into how they violated the covenant, you can see that all of that behavior is bringing shame upon themselves, has brought shame upon Yahweh, and that's why they're going to have to be punished, and more severely, it looked like, than some of the other nations that engaged in shameful behavior, even by their own standards. So Yahweh's not just enforcing punish and exacting punishment on just the northern and southern kingdom at this point. He's going against all of these surrounding nations for things that he finds just abhorrent. And when it gets to Israelites, it's like, this is how you have violated the covenant, and this is shameful. And this not only just brings shame upon me, but it brings shame upon you in the eyes of all of these other nations. And if I wasn't exacting vengeance on them, it would be all even worse for you. But I mean, they end up in exile anyway. But they just got so bad because they just keep repeating this cycle. But it was a way to define them, and it was a way for them to understand quite clearly that this is the honorable behavior, this is the shameful behavior. I need to avoid that, and I need to make sure my family avoids that, so that our tribe, our family, our tribe, the nation as a whole doesn't incur judgment, or bring shame upon Yahweh himself to the other nations. So there are differences for the Israelites in a lot of the dietary and customary laws. Like a lot of surrounding nations had animal sacrifices. That was nothing new. But the point behind them for how they cleansed, what they were cleansing their community of, was often behaviors that nobody else would find shameful in surrounding. Right? For Yahweh, Molech worship is abhorrent, but that was not abhorrent behavior for the other nation. It's just, these are these differences. And so expelling that pollution from the community became very important, so you could maintain the what we call purity, and that's tied to the honor as well, because that's how you interact with Yahweh and how Yahweh is going to treat you as a nation. Because again, the reason why your in-group is so important and your behavior is so tied, interconnected, as you said, the redwood roots, is because when punishment came to the nation, it doesn't mean every single Israelite was awful, but everyone paid the consequences for the behaviors of some. So it's very important to maintain honorable behavior, and reinforce the shame as a positive reinforcement to avoid breaking the covenant, because that's how they would understand themselves as a valued member, is if they were upholding the honor of their people, their nation, Yahweh, etc.
It makes me think of two things. Like, I used to get really upset in school because, it would be like, well, everybody has to miss recess because these 3 kids wouldn't stop doing whatever it is that they were doing. So like group punishment for the behavior of, but that isn't exactly the same idea that's happening in the honor shame system, but it kind of not.
Is. That's a good analogy. And let me tell you, because of any consequences that the bad kids that cause the punishment for everyone might have to face, they might end up getting some extra judicial punishment from the other kids in the recess, and not liked very well. And actually, what we say in the modern context of individualists is, that's not fair. I didn't do that thing. But to get the group behavior better, if everyone paid the price, it corrects it a lot quicker, because no one's going to tolerate the shameful person that brings shame upon the whole group, who is out of line, that has consequences for everyone. It's actually not a bad strategy. And, we see a lot of horrible discipline in our public school system here in the United States that you don't find in like Japan or China or something. And we say, oh, but they're so brutal and harsh. Yeah, but it works. They're not. They're learning astrophysics in the 4th grade, and we can't even get people to do basic arithmetic in the 4th grade. So take your pick.
That's true. But it's just like I think the way that now we look at that is more of a problem of, that's not fair, instead of, like you were saying, like, hey, because I do remember a few times after that happened, some of those kids who were responsible for that ended up tackled a little bit more aggressively in the playground afterwards, and it calmed it down a little bit. So,
but when you don't have a unified sense of honor, and you don't have a collective sense of everyone on the same page of what is honorable and what is shameful behavior, it's harder to do in an individualist thing. So I kind of sympathetic to the people who say, well, that's not fair because I didn't do it, because perhaps the people who are guilty of disrupting the class, that's causing you to miss recess as well, it may not be esteemed as any sort of honorable behavior to behave yourself In fact, it may seem as bad behavior if you're excelling academically in certain communities. They might see you as a nerd or an outcast and may not want to associate with you and whatever. And so even if you are, intellectually gifted, you may downplay your own abilities just to fit in with your own people, even if it causes you problems, at school. Well, at least at home, I'm not going to get bullied by the neighborhood kids who are going to pick on, the A student or whatever. So, I mean, I know that these seem like very trite, cliche type examples, but it illustrates the difference.
Right.
Whereas that would not fly. I mean, when you think that a disobedient child could, I mean, it's not like we read in the Old Testament that kids were getting put to death for disobeying the parents, but that was a maximum sentence that you could inflict. Right. But when you see that as a thing, it's like every single member of the community is instilling obedience to parents as, not just an honorable thing, but it also has a blessing attached to it, right? For long life. So you can do that and everyone's reinforcing that. So it just seems normal. Right. Whereas in individualist cultures like the modern West, we don't have a communal sense of what is honorable behavior. And so that way we just don't really relate to it as much. And we look at that as like, oh my gosh, they would put a disobedient kid because he didn't, well, number one, that would be a child whose life is consistently marked by disobedience, not by like one simple act of defiance, but just is marked by defiance. But the reason why you don't read kids getting put to death all the time in the Old Testament is because they generally weren't defiant, because it was instilled as a value that was attached to a blessing. So this is exactly, obedient to parents is exactly the kind of honorable behavior that culture would reward the kids, right? And their honor rating, their status would increase, among the community. And that's what they were chasing. Because in the ancient world, everything from food to honor, an abstract concept like honor, is just like food. Everything's limited resource. We go to grocery stores now, we think of unlimited resource. And if my grocery store is out of, my favorite brand of cereal, well, I'll just go to 2 blocks up the road to the other grocery store and see if they have my Frosted Flakes or whatever. Well, in the ancient world, it's not just, they didn't consider unlimited good. They thought everything was limited, but that included things like your honor status. And I guess here it would be an important point to note that there's only 2 ways to get honor. I think this was one of your questions, but
we were getting there at a certain point. Yeah.
But there's 2 ways you can get, and your question about genealogy hits on one of these.
I was about to ask that next, so go ahead.
So you have ascribed honor, right? Mm-hmm. And honor is ascribed to you by virtue of your clan, your family, your profession, things like that, who your closest associates are. If you're born into a prominent family, you get a certain level of ascribed honors that other people won't, just by virtue of being born into the right family, or being part of the right tribe, things like that. So where you are from gives you a certain ascribed honor. If you're from, say, Bethlehem, well, the city of, you're going to get more honor than being from like Nazareth, for example. I mean, the question, Jesus spent considerable time of his childhood there. Can anything good come from Nazareth? Well, the implied answer is no, right?
Right.
So where you're from matters. So that's one way. Who you are, what you do, where you're from. The other way is to acquire honor. Now, remember, in the ancient world, limited commodity. So if you are to acquire honor that you did not have, somebody's losing it. And that's where you get into like challenge repose contests and things like that. Or you're trying to acquire honor by outdoing others and like offering patronage to individuals or community groups. If you're a wealthier person and instead of oppressing the poor, like some of the wives in Israel during the time of Amos, you're trying to uplift them, and you're doing it, and that increases your honor by what you do, and that will often come to the expense of, are you outdoing someone else, right? To increase your acquired honor. as opposed to your ascribed honor. So those are the two different ways. So genealogies matter because part of your ascribed honor is where you're from. So take the genealogies of Jesus, for example. What you have is Jesus grew up in Nazareth. His earthly father, Joseph, Mary had become pregnant prior to their marriage. That was a little bit of a scandal in the ancient world, right? Those are kinds of things. If anyone was familiar, they might, maybe they weren't aware, but they might know that they had to flee to Egypt, right? So you have these types of things working against Jesus as far as his public reputation. So what are the biblical authors doing? Well, they're going from Abraham, in the case of Matthew, or Adam in the case of Luke, and tracing through David and all of that to boost up Jesus's honor rating, because he actually has a couple of things that are dinging it, from his childhood. So he's got these dinging it. So what they're trying to do is trying to bolster his ascribed honor as high as possible. And then when you read and he gets into the challenge riposte contest with all of the Pharisees and all of that, you see him acquiring even more honor. The crowd sides with him and are amazed at his teaching. He's leaving the Pharisees embarrassed because, he outwitted them in Torah, all of that. So that's boosting his honor rating as well. So, but those are the genealogies figure into trying to, well, he was actually born in Bethlehem. So give him that, even though, yeah, he was in Nazareth, right? Bethlehem. Let's look at that. Come from the line of David. Look at that. That's what we want you to see. So they're trying to boost his ascribed honor as opposed to all the dings against it that people would look lesser than.
Wait, and I'm going back to the genealogies thing. I had a couple of thoughts about that, because you see that one of the things that that King David gets in trouble for, and people that I've talked to about this don't quite get it. I think this honor shame idea helps with this idea. He was told not to take a census, and censuses were, a large function of them was to, one, trace family lineage, but two, was to take stock of how many military service age men you have
Right.
living in your community. But God tells David, don't take a census, but David does anyway. And partly because Yahweh is supposed to be seen as their defender, so they don't have to keep track of a standing army, because that's God's job. But then David does the exact thing he's not supposed to do. And so that's going to be, at least from God's perspective, that is something that is taking away from God's honor, because David's saying, look at our strength, not Yahweh's.
Right.
Taking honor from God.
Yeah, and of course, what he did that's out of the line with what Yahweh had requested. So that's shameful behavior. David's got a lot of marks he's got to live with, for centuries now. But when you think about what he was trying to do, is if he could show the muster of his own, the strength of the people, that's going to try to increase his personal honor rating, because he put himself before Yahweh, which is a no-no. But you can kind of understand his thinking about this. Why? Well, I mean, yeah, sure, we should always obey Yahweh, but what was important to him? His own status, right? As king of this mighty nation. Forgetting where the power actually came from, and all the stories where very little Hebrews overcome larger armies because Yahweh would confuse the enemy soldiers and they'd start killing it, or whatever he would do to help the, smaller, upstarts do better against their enemies. So yeah, but those ideas factor into his moral calculus, and it's, when a lot of readers, especially younger ones, that just want to read the text, when they get to like First and Second Chronicles and it's chapter after chapter after chapter of names. Yeah. First of all, best thing to do is get an audio version of the Bible to get through those parts. But don't put it on double speed so you can learn how to pronounce it when no one else does.
Right.
But, we might find that kind of thing exceedingly boring. But if you can find a name elsewhere in the Bible, it's important to go look, because when you look at these genealogies, you want to look at the history, and that history factors into the honor ratings of these people and how they are viewed by the audience, you know, in the original audiences for Second Kings, which would, you know, depending on what you think might be captivity audience, right?
Right.
So why would that matter? Well, how do we sort ourselves out, especially prior to return? How do we sort
Right.
ourselves out, and who should be what where? Well, those genealogies are going to factor into that. And of course, we don't know all of the names. Not every name that appears that's somewhere else in the Bible. But they understood the importance of all of that data to help them sort
Yeah.
themselves out as a people, as various tribes, as, you know, who's going to do what when we get back home. Those kind of things are,
Yeah.
yeah.
I spent 2.5 months crawling through those first 9 chapters of Chronicles with all those genealogies. But I like the genealogies because I'm just that much of an Old Testament nerd that there's so much good stuff in there. But that also, the genealogy question, I want to jump to Ezra Nehemiah because there's a whole hot mess that's going on there. But this really ties into this idea too, because they are very strict about you have to prove that you're from the family of Levi, because that matters for who can consider as a priest, what access that you have in those areas of the temple. They're trying to reestablish the lines of the genealogies, and it's extremely important. And later, when they're trying to establish the tribes, the tribe of Judah really matters. Like these lines going into the New Testament are really going to matter. But Ezra and Nehemiah, they're trying to get the priesthood up and going. And that was very specific rules about who could serve. And then you've got the married to foreign women, which is a whole nother level of shame. So talk about that a little bit, and that mess in Ezra and Nehemiah.
Well, yeah, the marriage. Well, at the same time, with a lot of crazy marriage issues, you know, as far as the honor shame goes. But sometimes it's directed. So, take Hosea for example, to marry Gomer, right?
Right.
I mean, that's that would be intentionally bringing upon shame, but that has important context in the New Testament, not just for the prophecy of the Gentile inclusion and all of that. But what you see is, and I like Hosea, you know, having to endure all of that. And I mean, Ezekiel went through a series of kind of probably personally humiliating
Right.
acts to recreate certain things to play out. But so with that, you know, that does have a purpose when it comes to reversing honor shame expectations that we find in the New Testament. Now, with sorting out priests, so who you marry is also a reflection of, and then of course polluting the lines, right? The priestly lines was a little bit of a no-no as well, because you can go all the way back and say don't marry certain people, you know, and there's precedent for that as far as what's honorable. Now, sorting that out, we tend to think, well, if they're, you know, we tend to think of the priesthood as the clergy, so they had a higher honor rating. That's not necessarily how it viewed, but within its own tribe, you know, the Levites had to live up to the honor codes of what's expected of them to be able to perform their duties of the temple cult. And if they fail at that, the other tribes, the 12 tribes, are not going to hold them in the same esteem. And what happens when they're not held in the same esteem as they should be? What if they're bringing shame upon themselves? Well, they're all going to stray from the temple worship, which means they're going to violate the covenant, in which case they're going to bring, you know, judgment down upon the entire nation. So it's supremely important for the priesthood to be honorable and have a high honor rating and make sure that they are, you know, each priest meets the qualifications, has minimal shame, has, you know, maintains their own personal integrity of purity as opposed to pollution, follows the ritual, because they set the standard for the other 12 tribes. And if they got a negative rating, then so does the temple cult itself, and worship is going to have a negative rating, and they're going to find it the temptation, which they always did, to go pursue other gods and whatever, you know, be whores, so to speak.
Right.
uh, as
It
Ezekiel calls
just
them. So when you're trying to reconstitute the nation, you're being told we got to build the wall, we got to do all of this stuff. Everything has to be in its proper order to get worship back going,
right.
right? And then to be able to defend the homeland. But if you are messing with that, if you're messing around with that and you're playing fast and loose, or maybe you think that at that point in time, maybe the priesthood had a higher honor rating than the other tribes and you wanted to slip in there, even though you're not from that line or whatever, you've got to make sure everything is on the level because you're trying to put a nation and a temple back together at that point. And so honor is the dynamics of honor shame matter all throughout that on just about every level you can think of.
Right.
Because that's because Braxton, I love Braxton's sermon that he get or his commencement speech. It's from one of the ones he gives, not the same every year, but one of the ones, it's from Nehemiah, and it's all about going and build the wall, get up and go do something. Well, it also matters how you do something,
Right.
and I love the charge, but it matters how you do it and why you're doing it, and what you are reorienting the nation back to as you put it back together.
Right. Well, when you put Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Haggai together, they got in trouble again because the first thing they were supposed to do was build a temple so that they could get the priesthood back going, so they could get the worship up and then build the wall.
Yeah.
But they did that in the opposite order, which again is bringing themselves above Yahweh and taking away from Yahweh's worship, from all of the, because that's actually the main the theme of Chronicles is worship.
Yeah.
And that this is how we're getting back into the land, we're getting back into the covenant, we're getting back into where we belong, our identity, and we're back in relationship with Yahweh, and we're supposed to worship. But then they get that all backwards again. Israel just never got off the ground. They just kept messing up from day one every time they got a new chance.
But what does that do within the tribes, though? Right? Because they think they're out of sync. They think you're out of sync. Everyone's honor rating is going down among each other, and that just puts you back into pursuing false idols. It puts you back into, bringing shame and ill repute upon the whole nation because the nation can't reestablish itself. Well, who does that reflect on ultimately? Yahweh.
Yeah.
Which especially when he says do a thing and you do this other thing. Right? It just doesn't work.
Right. So I wanted to a couple more things. I think we could fit two more questions in here real quick.
How does this person? How does that rate in the honor?
Yeah.
Well, a good way to tell is what do the so like if you read about the lives of the kings, for example, they're such an easy tell because such and such did evil that was in the sight of the Lord and he died and everyone rejoiced. Right. I mean, you see that with a lot of these cases, the way they report them.
Right.
So how they talk about it, how they talk about biblical characters will let you know how they were esteemed even during their lifetime. Right. So, and how the narrative is formed. If you can, I'm not ever telling people to read between the lines, but you can tell that the narration of certain biblical characters, are they presenting them positively or negatively, is going to tell you how they were esteemed.
Right. If they're having a party instead of a memorial after you're dead, you're probably on the wrong side of the honor shame equation there, that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to kind of go to the link between the concept, the link of honor and glory, to how those two are linked together.
Well, glory is just honor language, right? So God's honor, his estimation, we think of glory. When we think of glory, we think of radiant light, things like that, the glory. But what they're thinking of is esteem, right? So how highly esteemed are they going to be? And that is inseparable from honor, right? Because when they want to talk about something like Aaron's coat and they'll, or the sanctuary in heaven, the splendor, it's majesty and splendor. That's all. But that's not glory language, right? But that's what we envision. Like, we think splendor and glory are, basically tied together. But really, glory and honor are what you should think is tied together, and get the idea of radiant light. Oh, it's so glorious. That's how we think. But really, it's how high can you esteem? And if you think you're esteeming Yahweh high enough, go higher, right? Because we're talking about maximal glory, right? And so Yahweh says he'll not share his own glory with others, but what he will do is he will glorify others. Well, what does that mean? Like in Romans 8, 29 and 30, when you read, for no predestined, called, justified, glorified. A common mistake people make, people make a lot of mistakes with that passage, but when they think of glorified, they think, oh, that's something that happens to a person's body in the new heavens and new earth. Totally detached from anything else, right? It's like, wait a minute, does Yahweh foreknow people, or does he foreknow bodies? Well, people. Does he predestine people, or does he predestine bodies? Well, he predestines people. Does he call people, or does he call bodies? Well, he calls people, persons. Does he justify persons, or does he justify bodies? He justifies persons. But then you get to glorified, and he's going to glorify the persons. What are you talking about? No, he says he's going to glory them. He's going to glorify the person. He's going to hold them in highest esteem possible among other people, right? Like the elect in group versus the out group, them he highly honored is another way to translate glorified, because what he's doing is he is highly esteeming them. He's holding them in highest regard, right? Well, that's what honor is. And if you notice the pattern of the New Testament and a lot of these epistles of Paul, for example, is what others outside would find to be shameful, like Paul himself, for example, being shipwrecked, being thrown in prison, being beaten up all the time, right? Being ostracized by his former people, by Jews. All of that is things that the out group would say that is a man of shame. That's shameful behavior. What is he turns it on its head, right? And he uses that as badges of honor. And then he translates that to the rest of the Corinthians, that they should imitate that, or for example, in 1 Corinthians, not many of you are wise, not many of you are wealthy, right? I mean, some of them are, but most of them probably aren't. And what you think, what you believe in, the out groups, whether Jew or Greek, thinks it's scandalous or just stupid. It's just folly. But he's reversing that. The whole Sermon on the Mount is reversing honor-shame dynamics, right? Last first, first last, as opposed to including the Israelites at the time, how they saw certain things based upon their traditions. So just a little bonus tip: when Jesus says, "You have heard it said," and then he quotes a Bible verse, he's not actually talking about the Bible verse, but the traditions around it, versus when Jesus says, "And it is written," and he quotes an Old Testament passage, that's where he's actually talking about the passage itself, right? So oftentimes people get confused because he says, "You've heard it said," then he'll quote something from the Old Testament, and they think that he's changing it, but he's not. He's calling attention to the traditions around that, and then what he says follow doesn't actually change it. But if you go back to the original context, you look like he's putting it back to its original meaning. And so that's so when he says "you said" versus "and it is written" is when he's quoting it, like, famously with Satan. He quotes it and he uses it in his original context to rebuff the temptations. So what Jesus is doing throughout the entire ministry, really, but all throughout the Sermon on the Mount, is he is reversing what would normally be esteemed as honorable and shameful, and he's turning that stuff on its head. So the whole, and then of course, when you get to the Gentiles and you get to Paul's epistles, he's overturning what the dynamics of honor, shame of the outgroup pagans and what they see as shameful, he's trying to hold up as honorable, right? They think this is
Right.
foolish, but your wisdom is beyond compare to them, right? This is the wisdom of the Lord himself. And so a lot of the New Testament is reversing honor shame dynamics of the first century.
Right. So a lot of it's reversing what they got wrong and just resetting them back to the way it was supposed to be
Just
originally.
reversing it
Yeah.
from what others, outsiders would hold. Because if you are trying to be, if your self-understanding is how valuable am I to my family, my people, or group, but
Right.
you've left either Judaism or paganism, you've come to the church, they're gonna say that you're shamed, and your shame rating is through the roof, right?
Yeah.
So what what the New Testament authors are trying to do, because you're on the outgroups from your pagan neighbors and your Jewish neighbors, right? Nobody likes you. And so everything what you see in the New Testament, everything that the outsiders would think is honorable, they see what you're doing is shameful, and vice versa. So the New Testament is about reversing those dynamics to where what everyone else sees as shameful, trust me, God sees you, and this is the honorable behavior for our in group. And even if it causes you problems like suffering or whatever, would be people would think, well, you've done something shameful to have this coming to you, that whole idea of you getting what you're just, or it's karma, whatever. So if they're looking at you like that, what you've got to do is you got to prevent defection, or what we call apostasy or whatever, to where, because the temptation to want to belong to the in group you came from. Well, if you defect from Christianity, you're bringing shame, because you're saying that could not sustain, right?
Right.
But when you defect from paganism or Judaism to Christianity, you're bringing shame on them. So they're going to hold you in shame, because you have just shamed them, because you're saying that's not as as important as Christianity. And so there's going to be social consequences, but Paul's trying to reverse those values so that whatever consequences and suffering you might face, those are to be gloried. Those are to be highly honored. Those are to be esteemed. So
that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that as like a shame war before.
It is. And like I said, we have notions of that in our culture, but because we're primarily, like I said, it's all on a spectrum, but we're primarily on the guilt end instead of the honor shame end. And so it takes us a little bit, but once you get your mind thinking this way, honor, shame, what is being valued? What are they promoting? What are they advocating? Are they advocating something that sounds awful, like suffering? Why are they advocating that? Oh, they're trying to see that as an honorable thing as opposed to a shameful thing, because all of their neighbors are going to think it's shameful if you're having to so things like that. So all of this reversal of expectations of honor and shame dynamics is turning it on its head, and it'll help you understand the New Testament and the Old Testament a lot better. Now, the Old Testament is not, the Old Testament is, I think, easier, because what you have is here's what's honorable, do this. And then you have prophets saying, you're doing the very opposite of this, shame on you. And here comes judgment. It's pretty easy to see. But in the New Testament, honor is still important. And by the way, the New Testament has a lot of rules. Don't think that you get away from rules because you're not in the old covenant anymore.
Right.
Justified by faith and not by works of the law in the book of Romans also has about 92 imperatives, right?
Right.
Not that, right?
Right.
There's like some over 90 imperatives of what to do if you're a Christian. So you have rules too. And that's actually good, because now you understand what God esteems as honorable behavior, and we as a church can understand that. And we don't use public shame like they did in the Old Testament and the New Testament. We don't bring people to public shame. But why do they do that? They do that to reinforce the rest of the community, because nobody wants to be the source of shame. And so when you do publicly shame people in church, which I know that we don't like that, you end up not having to after a while, because nobody wants to be that. So
Right. So I want to try to. I know you had an hour time limit, but I want to try to sneak in one more question that just is bugging me here. It's if we can just quickly go through really quick, if we can try. But because going back to the link between honor and glory, that makes me wonder, because you see in Ezekiel the Shekinah, the glory, backs out and eventually completely leaves the temple and then Israel, and I don't think we see it come back until really fully into Acts 2. And the pouring out of the Holy Spirit, and that is kind of where we see that full. So talk about like the dynamic of that, of the removal of the Shekinah glory of God. But I talk from the honor shame culture perspective. Talk about like the leaving and the coming back and how that kind of works.
well, it's kind of interesting because what you have is we call it the intertestamental period, but
Mm-hmm.
documents were still being rented, and people are trying to understand, sort out, okay, is the exile over or is it not over, right? Because
Right.
even if we're back in the land, we're still occupied, and there was several different empires occupying it during that time. So when the presence and the glory of God has left, what that says is, these are not my people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
I'm no longer with them in the way that, in the specific special way that I was in the past. And that's because they are out of covenant. And just because they had the second temple and were reconstituting um, temple cult, right? What
Right.
their problem wasn't idolatry at that point, right? It was more identitarian around the traditions of the Pharisees of that time period that they built up, that took precedent over true worship. That was the idol, not false gods, right? That was the problem. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because, Paul himself says they have zeal for God. It's just not according to knowledge. Well, that doesn't just apply to they missed their own Messiah. That applies to why the Messiah was necessary in the first place, because Israel had failed at his task, right? So the honor, God's going to esteem himself over all. And if his people just cannot get their act together, he's going to depart from them, right?
Right.
So to honor himself, right, he's got to remove himself because they are bringing shame upon him. So what you see in Ezekiel, for example, is a picture of how God is esteeming himself. Now, what does Jesus do? He brings the shame. We think, oh, well, the guilt of my sin. Well, the Bible, the shame of the cross, right? He brings the shame of Israel upon himself. The shame of Israel's sin all heaps up on top of him so that God can dismiss it and then open up the covenant to all, Jew and Gentile alike, right? So it's not that God permanently writes off Israel, and you can read Romans 11 to see
Right.
that he hasn't done that. But the point is that it seems like God is going to honor his own name and his own reputation above all else. And so as God's people, whether in the old covenant or the new covenant, is orienting ourselves around God's sense of honor and glory, right? Because how is God glorified? I mean, we know that ontologically God is maximal glory, but God's not. God already knows how glorious he is. The point is to translate that glory to the world. And if God's people are bringing shame upon his name, his glory isn't made manifest, right?
Right.
So, and that goes for Christians as well. That goes for us too. But
Right.
ancient Israel
Right.
has this issue. We have this issue as well. Do you ever want to know? It always makes me wonder, if we're constantly bringing shame upon the name of Christ and reproach upon the name of Christ, why do we think that God is going to put up with it? Right?
Right.
He doesn't put up with it. And churches die
Mm.
out all the time. Christianity's shrinking in the West, but it's not shrinking globally.
Right.
Right? Where it shrinks somewhere, China and Africa are exploding with Christianity right now. So You know, if and again, it's corporate. You know, God doesn't have to contend. Most of the world for most of human history has been collectivist. I know that that's a
Right.
bad word for a lot of people. It's not. It's just an is. It's not. It's not. Oh, we should be collectivist or individualist or this is better. No, it's not that. It's just what it is. It's just, and
Right.
of course, most of the world and most of human history and a pretty large chunk of the contemporary world is collectivist. They understand these kind of things better than we do. That just because I, as an individual, I'm not as good of a Christian as Amber. But it turns out it doesn't matter because Amber's going to suffer if I'm a horrible Christian anyway, because that's how it works. We all live in this nation, and God could just, well, I'm going to start putting out candles now, right? Because
Right.
that's going to
Right.
affect good Christians like you because of horrible Christians like me, for example. So that's just how it works. Whether or not it's fair doesn't matter. But God's most preoccupied with his glory, but he already knows how glorious he is. He wants the cosmos to radiate his glory and it be recognized by creation. And as the kingdom of priests, we're supposed to gather up all of those praises and offer them back to God as our holy sacrifice. Well, how well are we doing that if we're bringing constant shame and reproach upon the name of Christ? Not very well. So it is God's glory and his honor is something that we need to be preoccupied with because he can remove his presence from us. That doesn't mean, oh, he's not gonna take you to heaven when you die. That's not what I'm talking about. But if you want to be a part, if you want your part of the kingdom to be fruitful, you want to live in accordance to God's honor codes so that you can radiate his glory and redound to his glory and attract more people to convert, to increase the number of people praising his glory. And that can't happen if we are bringing shame on his name. And
Right.
God's not going to put up with it because God wants his glory to radiate and it's tied to his honor. And if you bring shame upon the name of God, no one wants to have anything to do with Christianity. And that's largely because of Christians, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we placate the world or compromise with the world or sell out Christian values to the world. What it actually means is the less we do that, the more God's favor and blessing on his people for living right. And I know that sounds transactional. It kind of is. Patron-client reciprocity. We can go into that too. But the more honor and glory we bring to Yahweh, the more, even in suffering, right? Even when we're being persecuted, not judged by God where it begins in the house of the Lord, but from the outsider, it that's a great church growth thing. So even under suffering and persecution, look at the early church, for example. So when we're living right for God and preoccupied with his honor and glory, you'll be blessed by that. And you see the fruit of what that can do, even if it means speaking against culture.
Yeah.
Capitulating culture typically is what the Israelites did, and it always brought about judgment because they always ran off to their neighbors or trying to, bring some of that other worship into their life. And yeah, we're still going to temple, we're still doing the Sabbath, but we also have our figurines over here out of wood as well. And we're going to give deference to that too. That's always disaster. Well, okay, so you don't have a bunch of wood coverings of gods that don't exist because you don't believe that other false gods exist. Great, but there's demons behind all these other ideas that you're latching on to in the world, and that's going to bring shame upon Christ. It's going to bring shame upon Yahweh. So don't do that. God is preoccupied most with his honor and glory, and we should be too, for his promotion of his honor and glory. And we will be blessed through that corporately.
Right. So what you're saying is that, like, it's kind of how I'm summarizing picture wise in my head what we're talking about in our New Testament context and now in our current context, that, like, we all get saved together. So this is kind of like the church is like Noah's Ark, and you got to get on the boat. And to get on the boat, that's a process of learning to live in a way that reflects Christ and bringing honor to his name by living like Christ is and showing that honor to him in being a good reflection, a good image to everyone around us that wants, to make it so that people want to be in that place where they can live in that blessings of that honor that we, that just kind of went off the rails there for a second, but But basically, yeah, it's kind of this corporate idea of the church is like the ark, and you got to get on, but to get on, you have to share in that honor of showing it. Anyway, we'll just let that one go because it just went off the
Well,
rails.
here, let me give you a practical example.
Okay.
I know for certain segments of the internet, he's everyone's favorite punching bag. But I'm not going to punch at him. I'm going to actually. So a lot of people have been picking on Mike Winger lately because he's going after a bunch of charismatics who are doing horrible things. I don't go after him for that because number one, I like Mike Winger. I don't care what he does, but that kind of thing is important, right? To expose people who are bringing shame upon. My only problem is don't be selective in your targets, because I mean, there's just as much in the Southern Baptist and non-denominational conservative evangelicalism doing bad sexual abuse and cover-up stuff as what you're finding in the charismatic movements. And so people like Mike Winger and Justin Peters or whatever, they have their favorite targets, while what I'm curious is not about who you're exposing, but who you're ignoring. I'm all for bringing to light people who are engaging in shameful behavior, but I say expose all of it, even if it's somebody you like or who's popular, right?
Right.
What I
Yeah.
don't see is what I don't see from a lot of people is willing to take that energy to other segments of the evangelical church, where the people who report on that, like Julia Roys or whatever her name is. I understand people don't like her theology. They don't like this or that, but why are you not talking about the same things she's talking about when she exposes something? Why is it okay? We should trust you because of the people you expose, but not trust her. No, bring it all to light. Don't pick favorites and don't pick easy targets, because I think I'm all for exposing rotten, shameful behavior, but I'm for exposing all of it, not for just. So my criticism is not, why are you always talking about scandals? No, my only criticism to all of those people is, why aren't you talking about all of them? Right? That's the only thing.
But
I'm all for exposing
yeah.
all horrible Christian behavior and, charismatics, evangelicals, Catholics. I don't care. Expose all of it. Bring shame upon that, and let us distance ourselves from that, and let everyone see the entire Christian community dump shameful behavior. But let's expose all of it. That's the
Right. Yes. Well, you're right. Equal opportunity exposure, like, because Paul was the same way. He tolerated nonsense from nobody.
right.
So, yeah, that's kind of the basic same idea there. So, all
Yeah.
right. I know you.
I was gonna say, I remember after the was it Jerry Falwell Jr. and his wife and their weird thing at Liberty, or
Mhm.
y'all remember? I remember ever since then, I thank God every day that Braxton and I have very, very boring personal lives. Like, thank God that we're such homebody boring people, because I don't ever want any to be associated with anything like that, and I'm so thankful. And I know, don't get arrogant because you could fall or whatever, but I'm going to maintain a boring life and make sure Braxton and I hold each other accountable as being the most boring people on the planet in our personal lives, because it's all got to come out, because we're not. It's already hard enough to evangelize in contemporary American culture. It doesn't help when you have so much of this garbage going on and these scandals and abuse in the evangelical church. It doesn't make our task easier, especially as someone who's engaged in apologetics and evangelism on a regular basis.
Mhm.
So, like I said, I'm not saying, it's so much superior to be, an ancient culture or an Eastern culture, even in the modern world, but we do need to recover a little bit of this stuff, right? I'm not saying you can never unring the individualist bell once you're introspection. You can't deprogram that, and that you're always going to be that. You're going to trying to embed yourself in a collectivist culture makes you realize just how different you are. Okay, so I'm not saying we all need to be more collective. There's no way to be. You can't. It's just not who we are as Westerners anymore. We're just culturally different. But we can recover. But like I said, it's on a spectrum.
Right.
So let's recover on our spectrum. Let's move a little bit closer to the honor shame sense, because we know what it is. We just need to go public with it, and then we need to live out what is honorable behavior for the in group of Christians, point out shameful behavior, and try to bring as much glory to God as we can.
Right. Well, we're at gone a little past the hour mark here, and I know you asked to keep it to an hour. So, Pritchett, one final thought, and then where can people find you online if they want to go check out some more of your content?
Well, that was my final thought on the honor
Okay.
thing. But what I will say,
Okay.
but I will say is a great introductory work just to get your feet wet, and then you can pursue it's got a great bibliography that you can pursue for to branch off from there. Anything that you think is interesting is David De Silva's Honor, Patronage, Kinship, and Purity.
Yep.
It says unlocking the New Testament, but it'll help you also with some of the Old Testament stuff as well. So that is a good gateway book. And from there, you can explore the bibliography and branch out. You can look up, honor, shame, purity and pollution is very important. Dyadic personality, collectivism, which ties into corporate election and things like, if you're interested in all that, it all ties back to this anthropological stuff. So that's a book that I want to commend just to get into it. And as far as find me at Trinity Radio, you can go to Theology Geek Fitness if that's your thing. It's not really hardly anybody's thing, but it's a tiny channel that nobody watches. But Trinity Radio with Braxton Hunter is a lot of apologetics and theology stuff. And then if you're interested at all in getting even just a certificate, or maybe you want to get into ministry, if you want to take some courses or whatever, you can go to trinitysim.edu and fill out an eval. That's for Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary, trinitysim.edu. I can be found at all those places. I'm normally in the Trinity Radio Facebook group. My personal Facebook, I'm happy to take friend requests. I never send any, but it's just dad jokes, and I don't do theology or whatever on my personal Facebook group. But in the Trinity Radio Primetime group, if you want to get into theology stuff, I post there a lot and interact with a lot of people from Trinity Radio viewers. And I'm on Twitter at JD Pritchett, and half the time I'm just posting things I don't believe. The other half the time I'm posting things I believe a whole lot, and I'll never tell you which one's which.
All those links are down in the description underneath. I'll go back and double check and make sure, but I know most of those are down in the description under there and make sure. So, but thank you so much, Pritchett, for coming on. I know this has been a long time coming, and I definitely want to have you back on again, because there's a whole lot more territory to explore, I think, in this, because there's just so much that it gets missing in a lot of things. But go check out.
You finally asking me to come on your channel.
Well, I think that Derek Beeler is the only Biblical Rogues Gallery regular that hasn't made an appearance on my channel yet. So you're not the last one.
Good.
Derek is still not made it on.
The best for last.
That's true. That's true.
No, it's not. But I felt like being nice. No, Derek's the best. I love Derek.
I think Junior is the next one that he and I are in talks about a topic to come on and do a series on here with Junior, which would be an absolute blast, and then have a Brit would be even awesome. And Derek, I will be in contact, but my channel. So I've got there's a couple series I was planning to do throughout the summer that those have kind of cratered because they got rescheduled so many times that there's just not enough time to do them now. And my schedule has been a lot busier than I anticipated it was going to be. And but I've got some stuff coming up. We've got things have been pushed back to September, but we're going to be doing a really interesting thing with some friends about exploring the idea of creation and being narrative based on coming out of the imagination of God by an alternative way to think about the first three words of Genesis 1, and some of the play in Hebrew that we can do with that, and being narrative and exploring some of that. And I've got a really fun, I think, quirky one coming up. And actually, Derek, I was going to message you about this one. We're going to talk about the theology of breakup songs and letting go and learning how to let go of things. So it's good.
Great.
I like to look at the quirky angles of things
No,
because
I
that's a
hear.
little
Well,
fun. But
one of the things that I say at Trinity in one of my courses is that there's theology in everything. Now, whether
yep.
it's sound theology is a different matter, but I go through a lot of the biggest atheist thinkers throughout time, and it's
Mhm.
like Nietzsche was a theologian. He wasn't. The eternal return is just an eschatology. He didn't believe it was real, but that's how he wanted it in his mind. Schopenhauer, he was the anthropology guy. He wanted to study the world of will and representation, and how will
Mhm.
and he's coming off of people like Luther and Edwards, for example. Darwin's your protologist, theologian, right?
Mhm.
Origins. Protology just means origins, or how it began. So you can find from protology to eschatology and soteriology and anthropology and ecclesiology and Marx, I guess. But you can find all of these. You can find theology in everything. It's just what kind of theology is it, and how
Right.
are they constructed? So yeah, you can find it in songs.
Or just just the idea of sometimes you need some permission to let go of some things you shouldn't be holding on to, and breakup songs are great for that. So
There you go.
that's what we're doing. It's not anything like we're not going to
Yeah,
rewrite anything at all. We're just
you
kicking
can
around
you can
different.
exegete pop songs. Yes, I
Yeah. There's
it's
some good
I think
stuff.
that would be great to just exegete pop song lyrics. That
I
you know,
actually had
and offer
my
commentaries on that.
I actually had my systematic theology professor at Multnomah got up one day and he was like, "We are talking about the theology of Taylor Swift and today." And I was like, "Are you crazy?" And he lectured for 4 hours on the theology of Taylor Swift, but it was a very different, like, it wasn't what you would expect from. He was Pentecostal, so it was even more fun. But he really got into this and playing with this idea of how sometimes it can get into access and speak into things that we don't normally speak because it goes past the barriers or the hesitations that we have. And just like or she's got a lot of breakup music, so there's a lot of material there for learning how to let things go and when to get mad at the right things. And it was really interesting. So it's kind of a holdover of things I've been mulling over from Dr. Studebaker from a while ago, idea that I'm kicking around. But anyway, so everybody, thank you all for coming, and for those of you who stuck around and those of you who popped in and out. It's always a lot of fun just to come on and explore different ideas and kick around different topics. And so, Pritchett, thank you again, and we will definitely have you back on when I get around to getting something when squeezed into, because I'm getting ready to start my thesis. And this program that I'm in also has you do a teaching apprenticeship at the same time. So I'm going to be apparently teaching undergrads, which could be an absolutely fantastic disaster depending on how that goes.
A little
So
bit of
that'll
both.
be a lot of fun. I probably, because I'm so ADHD scattered, that I getting one thought to go for an entire like 45 minutes is going to be extremely challenging. So I'm probably going to end up confusing a lot more people than anything else.
Just
So
use notes in a
like,
PowerPoint. It'll keep you on track. That's what I do.
all right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And around here, we really try to focus on journeying to dwell deeper with God every single day. So go and be blessed.